todos, a todas. Buenas tardes, buenos días, dependiendo, buenas noches, del lugar donde nos estén acompañando. Es un gusto para nosotras desde Hilda darle la bienvenida a todos y todas a este tercer webinar de nuestra Semana de la IA. Y ahora voy a hacer switch a inglés, ya que hoy nuestras invitadas también tendremos un webinar bilingüe. Tenemos la opción de traducción, entonces nada más porfa ahí pueden seleccionar en la barrita de opciones de Zoom para poder tener la traducción en tiempo real. Tenemos ahí a nuestros intérpretes, a Danitza y Jorge, muchísimas gracias. Entonces ahora hago el cambio para que puedan también seleccionar el idioma de su preferencia. So hi everyone, welcome to this third webinar of our third edition of the ILDA AI Week. It's been very active and it's an honor to share this space with three amazing women whom I admire and also happen to be experts on this topic. When we decided to do this webinar about data readiness, we were thinking about how we could encase more conversations and discussions around how to build responsible technologies that require data structures and to really understand how those infrastructures function. So this is part of a fundamental conversation for us. And also we think it's a conversation that doesn't happen that often when we talk about AI. Everyone now is talking about AI and other intersections or AI risk or AI possibilities. But we also wanted to go like behind the scenes. Like, as we all know here, like AI is based on data and data sets. And it was super important for us to put that on the table and to have like a broad discussion about it, and also to explore possibilities in terms of exploring and thinking about new ways of governing those data infrastructures or even designing new models. So please join me to welcome Reyna Jenkins. Reyna is the Associate Director of the World Data System International Technology Office. And prior to that, she worked for Ocean Networks Canada from 2009 to 2023, managing its data stewardship team, who provides metadata and data management, geospatial services, and expedition support. Throughout her time at the ONC, she made significant contributions to ONC Ocean's 3.0 data repository infrastructure and interoperability initiatives with other ocean data providers. Since 2018, she has served on the board of the Core Trust Seal, the organization that defines the certification criteria for research data repositories to belong to the World Data System, and she holds a Bachelor of Mathematics in applied mathematics. From the cooperative program from the University of Waterloo, and her Master of Science in Ocean Physics at the University of Victoria. So Reyna, welcome and thank you for joining us. We also have Aimee Whitcroft, who's also known internationally for her love for data ethics, data governance, digital strategy, foresight, and futurism, on what she calls #OpenX, that it's open data, open government, open access, civic tech, open source, etc. She is the chair of the advisory board for the International Open Data Charter and is involved in numerous initiatives in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and overseas. She also is really keen on community, trees, and dogs. You can find her online, and she's always up for a chat. And last but not least, we have Silvana Fumega, who's the Global Data Barometer Project Director. She has served as a consultant for numerous international organizations, governments, and civil society groups. She acted as researcher and policy director at ILDA until December 2023. And since January 2023, she has been an independent consultant. And Silvana holds a PhD from the University of Tasmania, Australia. And she also holds a master's degree in public policy from Victoria University of Wellington, New Zealand, and a degree in political science from the University of Buenos Aires in Argentina. In the past few years, she has focused her work on the intersection of data and inclusion. And she's also the co-founder of Data Against Feminicide, a research affiliate at the Data Plus Feminism Lab at MIT, and a member of the Data Tanks Global Advisory Council. So to start the conversation, we will have two blocks. In the first one, each of our experts will present some of their work. And in the second one, we will have an open discussions around specific questions, and we will exchange some ideas and the knowledge of our experts. So thank you again. And to start and to trigger the conversation, I will start asking Reyna about her view on the state of the data for science purposes, and what vision about data for AI does the World Data System promotes. So Reyna, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you. And I'm just going to share my screen, just so just give me a minute for that. So hopefully you see it in the full screen view.
Okay. Yeah, all set.
Okay, so great, thank you. So I'm just going to just start off by telling you a little bit about the World Data System so that you understand some of the context that I'm speaking to. So the World Data System has a mission to enhance capabilities, impact, and sustainability of data repositories and data services. So with that, we create a trusted community of scientific data repositories. We work to strengthen the entire scientific enterprise through the data lifecycle and advocate for accessible data and transparent and reproducible science. So we do have a membership, and actually ILDA is our newest network member. So we encourage more partners in South America and Latin America to expand our network for sure. But this is the current breakdown of our membership, looking for the regular members are the orange ones, and that's the bulk of our membership. These are data repositories that are certified data repositories. But we also have associate, candidate, network, and partner members around the world. And we also are governed by a scientific committee, which is very international as well, spanning a range of scientific disciplines. And so this scientific committee is responsible to govern the activities of the World Data System and to make sure that we are doing work that is representative of needs from all over the world and representing all these different disciplines. So we have two offices. I'm representing the International Technology Office, which is based at the University of Victoria in Canada. And Meredith Goins is the director of the Program Office, which is based at University of Tennessee in the United States. And we have each have a small team to help us in the work that we do. So throughout everything, we're always, thinking about these principles, the fair data principles, the care principles for Indigenous data governance, trust principles for data repositories, and the open science principles. So everything we do is trying to put these principles into practice in essence. So when we think about AI, and really we are looking at how ready are we for AI in terms of data, but we did this poll last October at the International Data Week in Salzburg during our plenary session with the audience that are all, data practitioners of various sorts. And this is what we received from that polling, from that audience. And so clearly we have a long way to go to be truly ready for AI. And I mean, a lot of progress has been made in this last year, but I don't think we moved the dial all that much. And in terms of data readiness, a score of about 2. And so we have much to go in actually realizing the full potential of AI. So one thing that we have the perspective of at World Data System is this concept of data being such a crucial ingredient for AI systems. So what we put into these models, it influences what we get out. So we really want to make sure that we have proper data inputs, that we eliminate gaps and biases in their coverage, we deal with sensitive confidential data carefully, and that we're utilizing trusted sources of inputs. This is both for the training data, but also operational data in these models. And so this is a really great paper that I referenced here that looks at these sort of issues. And just diving deeper into that same paper, I really liked this particular paragraph because it really emphasized the importance of quality data, but also the importance of fair in those data sets to reach the potential. for AI and the value of trusted data repositories. So this was a great paragraph that really sums up our view of the importance of quality and fair data for AI purposes. And now we're trying to figure out how do we go forward and actually assessing that data is ready for AI. So we've been working with the Earth Science Information Partners who have done a prototype of a AI data readiness checklist. And these are just some of the questions in the 4 categories that they've prepared. And we're going to be diving deeper into these questions with the data repository community and trying to assess, do these questions make sense? Are they being clearly stated? How can we automate some of these checks? Or what is missing? So we'll be having a workshop actually in October, 2 different times. So if you're interested, please have a look and register. That we just had the registration and the website go live in the last couple of days. And so we'll be diving deeper into that checklist and then starting a pilot effort to begin to apply that checklist with a subset of data repositories. So we encourage you to sign up for that workshop if that's of interest to you. And then I really want to point out the importance of machine readable licenses when we're thinking about AI in the data sets. That I know, we all know, I think, that there are legal clarifications for licenses still being sorted out. And that is something that's important to continue to work towards a solution to. But it is a critical ingredient to have those machine readable licenses in the data in order for that ever to be realized. And there's this recent article just in the last couple of days from Nature that I suggest that you look at about that exact issue. And if we look at Creative Commons, they are doing a lot of work to figure this out, and they're revamping their strategic plan. Currently, we actually participated in a consultation call with them in the last couple of weeks. And so this is a very important area, I think, going forward for AI. So have a look at their recent blog post as well. But we are working actually with Creative Commons regarding open climate initiatives, and they actually have this recommended best practices for sharing of climate data, and we'll be having a webinar all about that in October. So stay tuned for those details as well. But again, not just the licenses, but also the labels. So when I'm thinking about Indigenous data, local context has these traditional knowledge and biocultural labels that will allow for machine readable, but customized expressions of the provenance, protocols, and permissions from Indigenous communities. So we're having a workshop all about that in the upcoming Research Data Alliance plenary that's in Costa Rica in November. But we'll be looking at the technical details about how you can actually implement the labels for Indigenous data sets. So that's what I wanted to highlight here in my first round of the questions. So thank you.
No, thanks, Reyna. And I think it's like a great way to start like thinking for the following blog in terms of the conversation. And also I love like this idea and how you presented how at the end your algorithm is just as good as your data, right? And there is it's very important to think about that we still have a long way to go in terms of how those infrastructures around different types of data it's being created, and also the way how you frame this idea of creating a checklist for analyzing data readiness. And I think those exercises, and I think Silvana and Aimee will come next, but also are very important at this moment in terms of creating collaborative knowledge to start thinking how and what we need to cover for data to be ready for this kind of wave of technology that is going super, super fast. So for the next presentation, I will ask Aimee if you can please share with us in terms of what are the challenges to mitigate data biases in AI systems, and also what are the risks of not having reliable and representative data. And so, Aimee, The floor is yours.
Kia ora, all. Thanks for having me here. It's a huge honor, especially to be speaking in the same space as such excellent wahine on such an amazing topic. Wahine being te reo Māori for women. You will hear some te reo terms. If you get confused, pop something into the chat if I forget to translate. Otherwise, it'll be there in context. So yeah, this is an interesting one. As I said to some of the crew earlier, it's something I could answer in 30 seconds, but it could also take books and books and books worth and as many PhDs as you can think of to answer. So I'm going to try and keep it quite brief without going on a huge rant, but let's see how we go. So the first thing, I'll probably do some scene setting as well, just so that we're all on a similar page as to where my head's at, because I've noticed over the years that otherwise it's very easy for everyone to think they're thinking about the same thing and meaning the same thing, but they're not. So the first thing I wanted to say is certainly when I talk about AI, I don't just mean Gen AI, and I don't just mean LLMs. What we've seen over the last few years is AI has changed its meaning hugely as predominantly a marketing term. So I think I say to people, let's bring that definition back to something that's much wider than large language models and technologies of that sort, because they're actually quite a small subset of the enormous value that AI can have, and there's some of the more damaging. And we'll speak about that in a moment, but always have that in the back of one's head. There are so many other forms of AI that have been out there for years, and that's not just conversational AI either. It's all kinds of very cool things, including generative AI that was actually useful, that gets used for designing like engineering componentry and architecture and stuff. It's very cool. So yes, there's my spiel about let's recapture the term. So when we talk about some of the harms of AI, and here I am talking broadly, but I think what we're seeing, algorithmic decision-making systems, including LLMs at the moment, because they are such a big thing for us, and the mid-journeys, and all of those generator type things. We know about some of the biases. We hear about, they're, especially because they're built on data. So kind of what they know is what we feed them. And then they hallucinate and things as well. They make stuff up, they confabulate. So there are things around making sure that, the fact that they can often re-victimize already victimized populations or continue to marginalize already marginalized populations. That can be around access to services. That can be about language. That can be about all kinds of things, right? And that's a big one at the moment. People kind of talking about it, but I see a lot of lip service, but not a lot of actual work done to do anything about it. There are other harms, I think, that these systems can generate as well in just our use of them. Things like enormous environmental damage. These systems suck up a vast amount of water, a vast amount of power. That power is often generated where it is cheap. And so what is generating that power and where it is being generated may not be the most ethical of places, especially as climate change continues to charge at us full bore and we don't seem to be doing enough about it. There are also things like, think about all of the minerals that get used to build these server farms and to maintain these server farms and all the new chips and things like that. Think about where and how those minerals are mined. Think about all of the mechanical turking that is done behind the scenes to clean up content, to help with the learning and training situations. That's often done by people in the global south who are paid approximately nothing and have to see some of the worst things that humans can generate. Of course, there's surveillance stuff and things as well. Is like your lovely listening device at home where they say they're not listening in. They absolutely are. They have to for training purposes, but also because they're surveillance devices. So there's this sort of massive list of harms. And then there's the misinformation, the disinformation. We've seen that a lot this year with elections around the world. Humans do that, but the scale now and the sophistication has definitely gone through the roof recently. So that's just a brief overview of some of the harms. I'm sure we all know about them, but I thought it would be good to raise them, especially those ones like environment and sociocultural harms and sort of mining harms and things that people, it's very easy to forget about them if you're not seeing them every day. So there's that. Of course, there are also other biases. not just the ones I spoke about, but a classic bias is automation bias. So this is the thing where if a machine tells us something, especially if the machine sounds like a human, we tend to believe it more so than we tend to believe another human. And we're seeing, again, all of the kinds of harms that can cause around the world. Like really hot, it gets people kind of really injured and dead a lot of the time as well, which is truly shocking. And then things like there's another bias, and I'll get to that later, around techno-determinism. So how data feeds this or doesn't feed this, and I'll get into data governance shortly, is so as Reyna so ably pointed out, is, garbage in, garbage out. If you put in data that is is already biased, and that will almost always be the case with historic data because of how it was collected, or where, or when, or by whom. This idea of fairness and warm data, data that has context is still relatively new, I think, for a lot of the world, and it's a much more expensive way to do it. But yeah, so you put in bad stuff, you're going to get bad stuff out. It'll anywhere between useless to actively damaging, right? You're not going to get good stuff. And again, we're not even talking about sort of LLMs and confabulation. Excuse me. But you can also, well, that's the really big one. But again, we get back to, if it's bad data, think about all of the resources that get wasted in having to recollect that data, or having to clean that data up. That's enormously intensive if we're talking about data readiness. There's a lot of work that has to go into it, preparing it for publishing or sharing, getting all your documentation sorted. So the worse the quality of the data, the more effort that has to go into it, on top of the fact that it's probably already going to generate bad results for you, kind of no matter what. And then there's the fact that humans are also sort of a bit like magpies sometimes. So we over-collect data in some ways. We collect huge amounts of data, but a lot of it's really bad quality, or it's invasively creepy. And this is, the privacy stuff that I'm sure a lot of us, again, in the Global South, are particularly aware of and particularly concerned about, as we see various democracies under threat around the world, and not just in the Global South. So a way to mitigate that then is to have, and everyone says, well, just have good data. But what does that actually look like, right? So good data, to me at least, is it's of the correct quality for its intended purpose. Not everything has to be a tier one, national statistics, just incredibly high quality data set. If everything was held to that standard, nothing would ever happen. So the first thing is to define what is the purpose of your tool. In this case, your AI tool, your algorithmic decision-making process, or anything else. What do you want to do with it? Right, then, what kind of data do you need? What kind of quality does that data need to be at? And then thinking about the principles. Again, I'll get to that shortly. So that would be the first thing. So it's good enough for its purpose. One ideally probably wants it to be interoperable. Again, the less interoperable it is, the more problems this is going to throw up if you're mixing different data sets together. And more we are, right? We have complex challenges to solve. And so we're going to need a complex set of, and complicated set of data points in order to try and help us solve them. There is no panacea. There's no one thing to rule them all. And that's where standards come in, and that's where open standards come in, because you're not going to get everybody using the same standard, but if at least it's a common set of standards, you can sort of map between them and get things to the point where they're roughly, well, you can make them interoperable, right? With mapping, and a lot of data management people doing this a lot, and various other experts. A big one, and we keep mentioning it, is ethically sourced data. So really thinking, where does this data come from? From whom was it collected? How was it collected? Was it done with their consent? Was it done with their involvement? It's got to be ethically managed. So that's, where is it stored? In which countries, under which laws, who has access to it when it's in flight, because it's got to go somewhere else to be processed. What does that look like? You've got to think about all of these things, right? If you're doing it well. And for me, I come from an ethics and sort of data rights and justice background. So that is absolutely top of mind for me. And then properly governed, right? And you will have heard in previous webinars and all over at the moment, people are talking about AI governance. And the thing to remember is that AI governance is fundamentally data governance. With some stuff added on, absolutely. But if you can sort out your data governance, you're most of the way there. And I think a lot of organizations still don't quite realize that. They do data management, but they don't do the governance, which is that one step back of thinking, again, should we be doing this at all? Because I'm a big fan of a lot of the time, just don't do it at all. You don't need to use that tool. You don't need to use that system. You don't need to do this. But if you are, what are we going to think about it? What are the, so examples of good data governance and good data governance thinking, and I'm aware I'm pretty much at time, are having really good frameworks that you then turn into practical roadmaps. You can have all the wonderful things in the world, but if people don't know what steps to take to actually work through it, you're in trouble. And there are lots of great frameworks out there. Have really strong principles, fair and care and trust will keep coming up. And working with your stakeholders, everybody involved. And I generally say to people, good data governance examples, they kind of start small with something that where you can actually make a difference. And then you sort of scale out over time. If you're trying to do some big bang, we're going to sort this all out in one fell swoop, it's going to fall over almost instantly and burn a lot as it goes. And but I'm at time, but I had a really kind of brilliant, but also kind of dark quote. Can I use an extra 30 seconds to share it? Just as a warning for people. It comes from this amazing article by a woman called Laura Preston. The article is called The Age of Hyperabundance. I'm happy to share it if people want the link. Okay, so she says, and this is talking about LLMs and so forth. If I were to get on stage and ask for diverse data sets, what would I be asking for but a future, and diverse data sets being key, what would I be asking for but a future in which we all have equal opportunity to be defrauded, to be surveilled at work, to be a patient in an Alzheimer's ward with a phantom at our bedside? What really frightened me was the future of mediocrity they suggested. The inescapable screens, the app-facilitated antisocial behavior, the assumptions advanced as knowledge, and above all, the collective delusion formulated in high offices and peddled to common people that all this made for an easier life. So I think that's the thing for me, is we really have to think about the systems. We really have to think about the data readiness, but what are we getting this data ready for? That's me.
Wow, Aimee, thank you a lot, because I think it's amazing how you start hearing everywhere the discussion around AI and possibilities, and maybe they are even thinking how AI is going to help us solve world hunger or other stuff. But I think also it's super important to connect that with the real world. It's not just AI exists in somewhere inside our computer. AI, it's also part of the real world, and as you mentioned, it has impacts on the environment, on the resources, on the people that it's also working and training the data, but also the people that lives in the areas where their resources come from to fit that process and that chain. And I think that it's not always as part of the conversation as it should be. And also in terms of the purposes, it's not just about the what's, but also the hows. And I love how you mentioned the purpose of the tools. And it's just not about, okay, now everyone let's use AI for everything. But also I think the underneath question is, do we need it? How are we going to implement it? And for at the end, what's the objective of that? And I think that's super important. And I think also connecting, and I think we will have the space also to exchange ideas. And I would like to connect your presentation with Silvana and her work in terms of thinking about management of data, but also governance of data. And as you mentioned, it's not the same. It's not the same to manage data, but to have strategies and plans to have good governance of the data. And Silvana, I know that you have been working in this a lot, and also working with governments in trying to measure the state of open data. And you were directing the first edition of the GDB, the Global Data Barometer. And for you, what has changed with AI in the conversation? And also a question connected to that is that the second edition, if the second edition of the GDB will include something related to AI or the data available for AI, etc.
Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation. I'm really happy to be here. It's really difficult to follow these presentations prior to mine. I mean, I'm going to try to do my best to keep the quality high as it was. Basically, what I'm going to try to do, and I guess then we can follow the conversation, is to give you some background in terms of what we've been working in the GDB. I mean, some of the things that, as Aimee was mentioning about data governance, in a general sense, I mean, talking about different elements that we were assessing in the first edition of the GDB, and then a few clarifications about how we are thinking towards the second edition, and hopefully that could be leading to another conversation. I'm going to share my screen. Is that working properly? Okay, perfect. So basically, I wanted to talk a little bit about the relationship between data governance and AI, thinking about data governance as one of the key areas that we are measuring, and we were measuring in the Global Data Barometer. And in that, I mean, I'm also thankful to Aimee because she's part of the conversation that we're having with the research committee with really insightful comments. So I want to acknowledge that publicly. Going back to the presentation, or the idea that I had for the presentation, is to understand or to put that into the table, the role of effective data governance in thinking and ensuring the quality and integrity of the data throughout its life cycle. Thinking that at its core, data governance entails maintaining high data quality and implementing robust data controls, which are crucial for training AI models, for making informed decisions, I mean, for different things that we are discussing in this webinar. So basically, as it was mentioned before, navigating the data governance landscape requires an approach that integrates many components, from legal frameworks to standards and to collaborative efforts to ensure responsible and effective data management for the benefit not only of the AI technology and the advancement of this technology, but for society. Some of the elements that are included are areas of availability, use, consistency, integrity, security, and standard compliance. But today, what I want to do is to focus more closely to what we call the governance pillar in the GDB, that it was mostly focused on frameworks, on regulatory frameworks and guidance and policies, and thinking about some of those elements like data protection, open data, data management, data sharing, and what were some of the key findings that we had in the first edition, and how we are trying to measure kind of these topics in the second edition to improve the way we understand these topics, also thinking about the developments in the agenda. Basically, the GDB emerged in 2020. It was building up on the Open Data Barometer that probably many of you already know. The difference was that the GDB is going beyond the legal and technical dimensions of open data to explore a broader data landscape. So in that sense, we are trying to assess the essential data foundations, crucial for developing healthy ecosystems. And we are doing that in a different way in the second edition. We are refining its methodology to try to better understand the complexity of the data agenda. One of the things that I wanted to highlight, just to start with this, and the importance of data governance, as Aimee was saying, data governance is kind of the key foundation for later talk about AI governance. And one of the things that I want to say, and was coming from the first edition of the GDB, that I want to clarify that the period that we were assessing in the first edition was mid-2019 to mid-2021. So in a sense, it seems to be like a long time ago. So, but many of the things are already, actual these days, but many things probably we're going to find different, and that's what we want to look at in the second edition. But basically, what I want to show here is the positive correlation between governance and availability of data. In that sense, I mean, you can see there that there's a clear correlation in terms of the governance infrastructure, but the problem is in terms of implementation. I mean, in many cases, we see this clear correlation, but when we are looking at implementation, there are gaps that requires attention. according to the main findings of the first edition, countries around the world are increasingly recognizing the importance of safeguarding personal data and the regulations around those topics. However, in some cases, these frameworks are provided only at a sectorial basis. They don't cover the whole country, or they are only focusing on one particular sector. In that sense, I mean, although 98 out of 109 countries that we surveyed in the first edition present some sort of data protection framework, only 46% said that they present a robust framework, leaving a significant portion of the global population vulnerable to data misuse and privacy violations. So let's take that into account, that even when we are talking about frameworks, as there's been a lot of recognition about the importance of these frameworks, there's still a majority of the population living with a or staying in a vulnerable position in terms of data misuse and privacy violations. In that sense, I mean, something that stood out from the first edition, what one of the things that Keisha, that is the coordinator of the African Hub, was saying in her analysis of the data. And in that sense, I think it's pretty clear what she says in that the fieldwork that they did back in 2021 identified gaps with respect to data protection or privacy standard in a number of countries in Africa, even where efforts are underway to promote wider data use and openness. The absence of strong legal frameworks alongside the advancements in technology seems to be a developing concern, particularly in countries where no framework at all exists to oversee the use of emerging technologies such as AI. So in that sense, we are talking about 2021, and it's a clear concern already, I mean, a few years ago, about the lack of protection for some of the countries. And this same quote can be replicated in some other regions. I use this one because I think it was pretty clear and to the point about one of the things that we need to think about. So in that sense, I mean, balancing privacy rights with the potential of data sharing for innovation and the greater public good presents challenges. Persistent concerns surrounding data collection, storage, and use continue to evoke ethical and legal dilemmas, complicating the quest for an equilibrium. If we are looking at the insight from the Global Data Barometer, they reveal a significant gap in data protection regulations across countries, as I was mentioning before when I was reading a Keisha quote. But there are certain aspects to highlight. While certain aspects are widely covered, 45 or more than 45% of nations lack robust provisions of data breach notifications, and 29% offer limited redress for harm caused by data misuse. Moreover, only 23% of existing frameworks effectively address location data concerns, with a slightly higher percent, 31%, tackling issues related to algorithm decision-making. Back in 2021, we were also asking about the different regulations and if they were already saying something about algorithm decision-making in the regulations that they were having. So in that sense, I mean, there are different kind of protections that are more, let's say, popular around the world, but there are many others that are equally important that are not being addressed at the moment. One of the other things that we can think about when thinking about, especially governments as a provider of data for the different algorithm decision-making tools, is about open data. In that sense, not only foster transparency, but also empower individuals and drive innovation at the general sense. So the proliferation of open data policies emerges as progress in a way, but also, I mean, there are many things to think about. The Global Data Barometer back in 2021 identified 74 countries with open data policies, 30 of which have legally enforceable regulations. The others have not. However, this potential remains untapped, mainly due to standardization and interoperability issues. As was mentioned before, only 47% of policies address common data standards. So in a sense, I mean, even though in many cases we see regulations, 74 is quite a big number. There are many things to think inside of those regulations and policies that are not being addressed or are not implemented. So in that sense, open data initiatives struggle to achieve their full impact without consistent standards and interoperability systems. It was mentioned before, data management. I'm gonna briefly show. Here, what we did was try to compare, from different exercises, the GDB, but also the 2015 Open Data Barometer, the 2017 Open Data Barometer Leaders Edition, and the 2020 Latin American, the Caribbean edition, to try to think about the insights that they provide. And this comparison, what is showing us is that there's a modest global trend toward a more robust data management. But there's still, a concern and not a lot of growth in that department. And in many cases, what was notably for us, that the countries that are increasing are not the ones belonging to what it was called the Leaders Edition. The ones that were ranking higher in terms of, in particular, open data and data management policies. This one, I'm trying to speed because I think I'm taking too much time. But one of the few things that I want to say, and I think is quite important regarding this topic, is about data sharing. In many countries, there is still a lack of strong regulations governing data sharing practices, and that is kind of possessing different challenges, and it's difficult for the use in terms of access and use of diverse data sets needed to train AI models. While 30 countries remember that I was saying 109 countries was the overall sample, 30 countries have established legally binding open data policies, but there are challenges remaining in standardization and ensuring interoperable, sorry about a complicated word, data publication, which are really critical for effective data sharing and collaboration. So if we are thinking about the things that we are saying about standardization, open data policies, and also adding to that the lack of regulations and protocols for data sharing practices, we have a problem in terms of thinking how we are going to build new AI tools and different algorithm decision making. So according to the GDB, most existing frameworks focus on data sharing within government entities, but only 16% of those frameworks explicitly address the use of data in AI application, and only 26% of them focus on data sharing within the private sector. And I think, and this is an opinion, that in the next decade we can expect more and more voluntary and mandated data sharing arrangement between businesses, industries, between business and governments, and without clear frameworks to facilitate and govern these arrangements, we risk missing out not only on the positive uses, but also living outside of these uses to vulnerable populations and to be vulnerable for misuse. Pretty quickly, how we are gonna approach AI in the second edition. One of the things that we realized is that we couldn't address certain topics just looking at one indicator or one action area. So we needed to look. I know it's quite difficult, this graphic, but the idea is that we need to pick different elements from all the indicators and different sectors to better understand the impact of certain issues. And one of them is data foundation for artificial intelligence. So we are going to explore the readiness and implementation of data for AI technology by looking at different elements and sub-questions inside different sectors and different indicators. We are going to be adding also secondary indicators from other sources. In that sense, we were already looking at the e-government survey in the first edition, but we are going to add probably new sources like the Global Index for Responsible AI and other relevant sources of information. So the idea is to better understand the progress and challenges related to data foundations for AI across different regions and across different topics. So I'm going to leave here because I think I took a lot of time. I'm really sorry about that. I had like too much information to cover. I tried to speed, but I'm going to stop here and I'm going to leave the time for a conversation.
No worries, Silvana. I think it's great because this also shows kind of a baseline in terms of what's the context, what are the challenges. And I think that's part of the value of these types of tools that measure, like a certain period in time and can give us like a photograph of what's going on. And I think they are super useful in terms of thinking about the future or thinking how to address challenges. And I think these measurement tools are super relevant also in terms of the conversation and the connection with AI and with other tools, as you mentioned, the index, for example. So also like taking some of the things that you mentioned in your presentation and thinking about governments as providers of data for AI, but also in terms of different sectors. And I'm thinking here, because you were talking about open data, but also Reyna talked about the scientific community and also that data sharing process that happens simultaneously in different sectors and different aspects. I think it's something relevant for the AI discussion. And like the next question, and just to open the floor and to have this conversation among us, will be, how do you think that can be improved in terms of maybe regional level, global level? When we talk about data sharing, what's missing? It's not just about the legal framework, but also what else? Because data sharing, it's kind of an ecosystem, right? It's not just the laws or the infrastructure. I think it's a combination of many things. So how can that could be improved? And also, what experiences do you know that could be used maybe as a reference? Maybe there's specific sectors that are already doing it. And as you mentioned, government to government, government to private sector, et cetera, et cetera. So what are those good examples that maybe are not really big or they haven't been apply in many contexts, but are good examples that we could follow? I don't know who wants to start.
I can try if you want. I mean, just
yeah, sure.
briefly, just to follow what I was saying before. Again, I mean, I was saying the lack of, in many cases, frameworks and strategies to think about how to improve and how to arrange data sharing processes, which involves granting specific stakeholders access to data under defined limitations and controls. So we need clear guidance and legal also backing for that. In many cases, I mean, we also seen different type of exercises. Still, I think in many cases are in the exploratory side or the steps. And in many cases, there are examples that can be used. Not only to think about domestic flows of information and data, but also thinking about international. I think it's a critical point that we need to address, because we are not, I mean, even though when I was talking about the GDB, I was talking about country-based framework and regulations, increasingly we need to keep, thinking about the flow of data and information across borders. So that's an important aspect. But some of the examples or the models that I could think about are not only regulations, but also models like data partnerships, sandboxes, data trust, marketplaces, data commons. I mean, there are many things that can be done and established that then could be backed by regulations, thinking about what are the legal protections for the people and their rights. But also there are many models that could be implemented, to share and to exchange data in different cases. And one of the examples that I took, I mean, the GovLab did several years ago, a study on different aspects that is still relevant and is even updated because it has an AI tool that is implemented now. That is the case in Colombia for Aclimate or Aclimate. I'm not sure how was the right way to say it. I guess Aclimate. That is about, I mean, sharing or information in terms of meteorological and agronomic insights to Colombian farmers. I mean, collaborating with academia and governments, they help farmers to make informed decisions. And in that sense, I mean, they could help also save farmers many millions in terms of making decisions around weather prediction. So that platform not only was implemented in Colombia, but it was also translated to other similar regions that could be used, and that they were like agriculture heavy regions to optimize their decisions making. And in that case, I mean, it's a really, in a way, old, because it's been 2013. I mean, in the space that we are talking, 10 years seems like a lot. But in a sense, they were putting the foundations to exchange data between different sectors for the benefit of farmers and other people. And I think there are many things to do in regard to those examples and different other examples, but with the protocols and the right steps in place for everybody to be really care about and preventing the risk. In that case, there was personal information, because they track many things, but they had protocol in place to avoid that information was shared or was in risk. Again, it's an old example, but I think there are many more that we can think about that could be implemented. That again, regulations are important, but are also important the different examples and different protocols that could be in place when everybody knows exactly what are the rules and the steps and the risks that they are taking in terms of data. That's the example that is coming to my mind right now.
No, thanks a lot, Sil, because I think that also shows how in certain areas, very specific, maybe more technical sectors, the conversation around data sharing is different. As you mentioned, meteorological data, because they also have like a long story in terms of sharing information and having the infrastructure for that, cross borders, etc. So I don't know, Reyna or Aimee, would you like to add something?
Either of us can go first. I don't mind. I'll just jump in then. So I have a few just initiatives that I thought I'd highlight here in terms of data sharing, a little bit more on the research data angle, and I'll just put in some links in the chat maybe as I go for them. But the first one I wanted to highlight is some best practices that have been emphasized in a joint statement on research data. This was put out, I guess, within the last year by the consortium of Crossref, Data Site, and STM. And we actually did a webinar recently at the World Data System to host and explore these 12 practices a little bit more. So I'm also just giving the link to the past webinar recordings that we have. And you can just scroll down and look for the one that was in June. And they have a number of practices, but you know, they really are emphasizing this the importance of having the quality metadata and comprehensive metadata, that the traceability is there between the data and the research articles and anything that's derived from it. But one also really important piece in terms of driving the sharing of data and actually making it more and more of a reality for researchers is to credit them for that effort that they're taking. And so that's one, the recommendation is around that, introducing into the research assessment process that data sharing and data citation is something that should be done, and they should get some value out of that or some credit. So we've also been doing a little bit of work with that at the World Data System, trying to advocate with some efforts that have been going on. And we do see this, you know, this is a very active topic within the International Science Council, who have been doing some reports around the reformation of how we do research assessment, how we do publishing, and I'll put in some links about that, but so I'm just going to throw in one report as an example of that to start. But until we have the researchers really being valued for those efforts of sharing and help and working with repositories to ensure that data is well curated, well preserved, you know, it's really not going to be shared. So that's super important. And then another major initiative that I think will yield some insights about data sharing at a international level for a super important topic is there's the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework that is working on the access, benefit, and sharing. And they have these, this part is looking at these goal C and target 13. I'm going to post a link about that as well. But this is an active area that they're, you know, they're working to figure out, and I expect that more clarity will come in November when the COP for biodiversity, the Coalition of Parties for Biodiversity, happens. Because there was a meeting a week or two in Montreal ago to kind of continue this effort, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what's going to come out of all of this. I know one thing I'm really glad to see built into this goal is the support for that the knowledge sharing from this is attributed, you know, in a fair way, but also with particular recognition of the Indigenous communities. So this is a really great effort that I think that we can all learn from as it, you know, it continues to play out. And then I think just one other thing around data sharing that's been really helpful, that's been advancing in the last few years and it continues to advance, and there's lots of room for improvement, is the idea of federated data systems. So making that sharing of data kind of available at a regional level or a disciplinary level. I've seen a lot of great examples, but for example, there's a polar data search, there's the ocean biodiversity system, there's in Brazil, there's Oasis Brazil platform as a national federated system. So there's all sorts of examples and more so, and this is really helping, you know, it's the interoperability of the metadata, the data formats, services that are being offered for the data that are allowing for that, and we need to continue to build that interoperability. That's really a big challenge. And coming back to what Silvana was saying about the standards, we need those standards to be in place in order to build those systems. But I think that's a real avenue for effective data sharing as we go forward.
Super. Thank you, Reyna. And I will just directly jump to Aimee, because I know you also wanted to add something.
Thank you, Totoko. Supporting everything we've said before, federation, standards. Of course, there's the classic joke, you know, of we've got 13 different standards for plugs around the world. We need one unified standard. Now we have 14 different standards for plugs around the world. It's funny because it's true and it makes us want to cry. But slash get a glass of wine. But it's thinking about that. So how do we map them and so forth? So yes, huge support to everything we've said before, that people have said before. I just wanted to reiterate, I think that there's this, so we'll leave techno-determinism for another rant another time, but I think there's this tendency when we talk about how difficult it is to do data sharing is resource, you know, capacity, the humans that need to be put against it, and the other kinds of resources. But I think the big danger here is that a lot of the time it's this kind of work, this is data management work as well as data governance work, but more, I don't know, but is that it's sort of marginalized into just being seen as like a technical project that the tech nerds over there do, right? And then what you have is you've got the generally like highly technical folk who go, we don't worry about the ethics and the policies and the laws and the frameworks and the regulations and stuff, we do this. And then you've got the people who think about the ethics over here, and then you've got the people who think about risk and compliance over here, and everyone's kind of yelling at each other, but people aren't working with each other. And that doesn't even include the communities affected and, you know, all of that kind of thinking. So I think one of the best ways we could deal with sharing data better is again, like pick one or two like really key challenges, like a problem, and not something fluffy like climate change. That's not a pick one or two like quite gnarly things where you can actually make a difference. Then what you do is say, what data, this is what we were saying earlier, what data do you need? Identify what the questions are that you have, what you need to answer those questions, and then go after that and get everybody into a room together across regions, across whatever scale you need, working on it. What that'll do is teach people how to share the data that they need to in the ways that they need to share them. And then you can start to scale it out into other kinds of federated situations, because depending on the problem and the context, regional or cultural or whatever it might be, how you share that data best is going to change. There is no sort of one good way to do it. Anyway, but yes, let's get over let's get more multidisciplinary is what I'm saying.
No, thanks, Aimee. And I think also, as you three mentioned, like this, like the challenge is there, and also I think it's super important, Aimee, that you mentioned like this idea of like having multi-experts at the table in terms to solve this question of how we share data, etc. And also, I know that as Reyna mentioned, there are very good examples in the research community, research and science community in terms of how they are sharing data. And I think at this point, it's super important that we need to start like sharing and crossing knowledge between sectors, because I think there are many challenges also for the government in terms of, okay, how do we do this? And not many of the questions, the answers are already there because somebody elsewhere maybe did something to solve that issue. So I think at this point also it's a way of how we share knowledge in a better way. And I think at some point people think that AI is going to solve that issue for us now in terms of like accessing the knowledge. But if we don't put like the human knowledge, human networks, and the human work that is being done historically to manage data better, to share data better for specific purposes, I think we're like kind of missing a very important part of the puzzle. And my last question before I open the floor for if we have any questions from the audience, it's in terms of that collaboration or that multi-stakeholder collaboration. For example, and going back to one of the measurement tools that we are doing at ILDA as the LATAM Hub, it's part of the results of the Global Index for Responsible AI show that where the government is not addressing AI as with a responsible AI perspective, the ones that are doing that, it's the academia, civil society, researchers, or even the private sector. So sometimes like that work and how we can improve the conversation among sectors. And they have shown that the work done by non-state actors, it's like key to outlining this human rights ethics perspective or human rights AI path for AI. So how do you think we can enhance that multi-actor collaboration or multi-sector to promote better AI, or even to have different conversations, even also among regions, north-south or south-south, that are sometimes missing also? So I don't know who would like to start with that one. Aimee, please.
Mostly just to reiterate, I think is let's cover off one or two. And you know, I'm a global South person. I'm African originally, so that's always going to be really key for me. And now I'm in the Pacific, so it's really key for me. but coming together to pick one or two challenges and then working really strongly on those, bringing in all the different actors together, because yes, it can't just be government. It needs to be local government as well, but we need academia and science, because such amazing work goes on in terms of how to share knowledge, but everybody thinks that nobody else has solved something, or anthropology, you know, or sociology. These things are generally solved. So as you said, we need to bring them together. And I think there also has to be quite a strong conversation, not only about how we reward people in various ways for the value that they create and for the value that they share, but I think particularly in some sectors more than others, there has to be an understanding that this isn't always going to be a profit extraction exercise. And in order to contribute, they may have to actually give up a little bit of something in terms of coming to the party. I don't want to get into too many details lest I sound turn a whole bunch of people off, but it's that idea of, in order to work together, we need to share and we need to collaborate, and trying to sort of balance those things out of what you get out of it, but also what you give into it, because these are wider challenges than somebody's, I don't know, profit and loss statement or something like that. And I know in the Global South, we've particularly got some strong challenges, but there are also parts of the world that I wouldn't class as Global North, but they're also struggling with similar challenges. So where can we join across cultures as well to learn from each other and to share?
That's great. Thanks, Aimee. I don't know, Silvana, Reyna?
Yeah. No, I was just thinking while having this conversation, and also about a presentation that I had this morning to Latin American crowd. And one of the things that I was mentioning there, it was mostly about data and open data, that one of the things that defines, in many cases, the region, Latin American region, and probably we can learn from it, is the community. I mean, the way that it was created like a decade or more ago, something like that. And that has been one of the key things to learn about. And even though it was in the open data field, I mean, there were like academia, journalists, civil society, governments, people that were in government and then civil society, and the other way around. We know, I mean, many cases. So there was kind of a connection because we all care about the topic. So I know it's not the same. I know it's a different situation, different stage, but there are things there to learn from. I think that we can do some of the things that we were doing back in the day, thinking about these topics, not only in Latin America as a region, but thinking about, I mean, we are more and more, we are connecting, I mean, because of the developments in technology and so on. I mean, like we have like these tools that we can use to facilitate conversations and meetings and so on. So let's take advantage of that, and let's use the examples that we already have from the field, or a different field but similar, that we can use, and also learning about the things that we didn't do right. For example, like try to include the private sector more in our conversations, because like it or not, is a key player in all these things. I mean, you need to find the right incentives for them to be in the conversation, because in many cases, they don't have the incentives to be in this kind of conversation. But trying to find the way to include them, the way to find those incentives, I think is going to be key. I don't have the magic solution for that, or how to do that, or how to replicate things, but I think there are many things that we did right and that we can learn from it. And the same way, there are many things that we did wrong and we can also learn from them and try to replicate in this new stage of the data ecosystems.
Yeah, totally. Thanks, Silvana. And Reyna, I don't know if you would like to add something to this reflection.
Yeah, I mean, over the last, year for sure, and even, so I've been really starting to think a lot about this in terms of how data intersects between, not just research, but moving into with government, with indigenous communities, with industry, with citizen science. And I've fortunately did have the experience when I was working at Ocean Networks Canada to cross all those boundaries in the projects that we did. So that was in sort of the ocean realm. And so we did have industry partners with technology demonstrators for data collection, but also where we were collecting data, say with seaweed farming operations, also with the government sector doing some data sharing, very time-consuming and difficult work to agree upon standards and to deliver data in the same way on the same platforms, but that work is worthwhile. Working with indigenous communities on the coast and trying to respect their indigenous data sovereignty and the concerns that they have for, some data sets were made restricted access, when that was deemed appropriate by them. And then also with some citizen science applications that were, doing some comparisons with what the researchers were finding versus also with what machines are finding and AI algorithms. So there is, progress that has been made in crossing these boundaries in many disciplines, but there's a long way to go. With World Data System, I'm mostly operating in that research data sphere, but I do have the opportunity once in a while to cross over. So in Canada, I find that we do have a little bit of a disconnect, but I'm trying to find ways to cross those boundaries. It seems like the government open data people are at different meetings and events than the research people, than the industry people, and how do we cross these boundaries a little bit more? So I've been trying to purposely insert myself into conversations where I don't normally go, just to have that cross exchange. But I think we just really need to do more of that and get out of our comfort zones and feel uncomfortable some of the time. So yeah.
No, thanks, Reyna, because I think at the end, that idea of having like diverse communities, I think it's super important, and it connects all what you mentioned in terms of how do we work better but also I think, as you mentioned, Silvana, some of the very important things about community in Latin America is the way how trust was developed over time. And I think also at the end, like to having these communities or to be able to cross those boundaries, also I think trust is super, very important. And if you have people from government, from academia, from the science field, from civil society, I think sometimes having, we have like a common objective of a common purpose, I think that kind of also helps to move things forward. And I think it's super important because at the end, it seems to be super technical, a technical conversation, but at the end, trust is super human. So I think at the end, we go back to basics, no? So now I would like to just
Can I add something? Sorry, Gloria.
For sure.
As you were saying that, and I was listening to Reyna, one of the things that was coming to my mind, I was discussing with a colleague a few hours before. It was we were rethinking or remembering the different data-related communities or agendas. I'm not sure how to call it, depending on if we are talking about data privacy, open data, access to information, statistical offices, and so on. And that we've been, like Reyna mentioned, in different conversations, and probably we were talking about similar things, but we are not talking to each other because we seem to be talking in different languages or something like that. And probably right now, this is a good opportunity and a good excuse, let's say, for different communities to get together. I mean, we are talking about open data, data privacy, and so on, as different elements that need to come together when thinking about how to mitigate risks and prevent misuse of data in different places. So probably also it's a good opportunity for different communities that were not that familiar with each other and not talking to each other as often as we should or we think they should. Probably it's a good opportunity also to make them come together for a joint goal, as you mentioned.
No, I think that's great, Silvana, because I think also part of the challenges, even with AI, and the conversation around AI, and I think I'm sure that many of us here have been at different forums, different formats with different groups, like sometimes discussing the same things or the same things from different perspectives. So even the conversation around AI is super fragmented because now it's kind of the hot topic. But a few years ago, it was data and open government, and like suddenly that we are just kind of repeating ourselves, and you see the same people in the same spaces talking about the new hot topic in the scenario. So yeah, I think we need to do, and I also just like kind of an announcement, but also for all of like joining the World Data System, it's kind of for ILDA, it's super meaningful, and I think it's also an opportunity to bring like the community that we have been working with in terms of open data or creating communities of practice around different topics, and maybe we could be that bridge or maybe help to build that bridge to start having these conversations more often that I think are super needed at this point. So I don't know if there's any question. I cannot, because I'm checking the chat and I don't see like any questions from the audience, but please, if you have any question, please write it here on the chat, because I know we are kind of like, we are at the end of the time that we allocated for this. But if we don't have any question here, I would like to take advantage of that, and I would like to make one final question for you now that I have you here. And before that, please, I'm in the name of all the team at ILDA, we're super happy because this conversation has been super rich, super diverse, and also we think that super needed, because sometimes data topics are not as popular as other topics, but it's super important to talk about it. And I think the experience from you three kind of brings different perspectives, and that was super important for us. So thank you for your time and your effort to be here today with us. So my final question, and if you can answer the question, and if you want to add something else, please feel free for that. It's, if we think about 10 years from now, how will the data ecosystem, data infrastructure around the world will look like? Will we have open data like for everything? Will that scenario will be more closed and governments will be more selective in terms of what data they are sharing? Or are we going to be able to make companies to share all the data that they have because at the end it's like beneficial for the world? Or we're just going to have more closed bubbles and different circles? So I know that I'm being super futuristic, but I also want to use your brains to think together and to see how you see that future for the data ecosystem, and think about how ready data is for what's coming. So Aimee, please.
If I might jump in quickly, this is just off the top of my head. I'm sure there's a lot more to say. I think the fragmentation we're seeing at the moment is going to be much bigger. So there are going to be some places that are very open and very collaborative. There are going to be some places that have retreated into a walled garden that ends all walled gardens. And we're going to see everything in between. We're going to see major corporates kicked out of some countries and entire regions in ways that haven't happened before. We're going to see major corporates broken up in ways that haven't happened before. But yeah, I don't think it's going to be an open close. It's going to be much more fragmented and much more strongly so, I think. I'm hoping that the people involved in this chat and my fellow panelists and so forth are of the let's do this ethically well, share the stuff that should be shared and protect the stuff that shouldn't mindset. But I know that that's not always exactly how people think of it. For example, the US and the EU are going to do vastly different things. That's not counting Australia, which is more American, or, you know, for example, the Far East.
Who wants to jump in? Silvana.
I'm still thinking. I mean, like, I'm not sure what to say. I think I kind of agree with Aimee, and in many cases, I mean, it's difficult for me to think about how it's going to look like in 10 years, because I think in the past 10 years, well, 10 years ago, we didn't even think about that we were going to be talking about this when we start discussing open data, and everything should be open, and people are going to come running and use it, and everybody will be happy, kind of sort of idea that we had back then. So I'm not sure. We see like many, let's call it trends, that is not trends, but they are like hot topics, as you mentioned before. I mean, from access to information to open data to now AI. What is going to be the next trend, and how is that going to impact the other parts of the other communities that were before that? I really don't know. The only thing I hope that we continue discussing, I mean, we as the whole society and different communities talking about data, that we keep talking about it, and that we can keep the pace with the advancements, because I think in many cases, the discussions, and let's not even think about the regulations, are coming running trying to get to what is next, and the advances in tools and technology are far behind those kind of regulations and discussions. So I'm really worried that that speed is gonna increase in the next few years. So I don't want to be pessimistic, but I'm not sure what to say about how these conversations are gonna look like in 10 years. The only thing that I wish and I hope and I think is gonna be okay is to keep having these conversations. I think that's the key to try to mitigate some of the risks that are coming ahead of us.
Okay, so maybe I'll go next then. I mean, it is difficult. When I think about what's happening in the next 10 years, I think about, well, where have we come in the last 10 years? And I mean, it's as far as data goes, we've come a long, long, long way. And also just in terms of international collaborations in data, we've come an immense distance. Back when I started doing data management, it was really hard to find a community, and now it's, you know, it's very international and very connected with, you know, well, these Zoom webinars for one thing, didn't really exist so much back then. So who knows, maybe we'll be like using our 3D headset.
Holograms.
We'll be like, yeah, holograms in a room together or something. I don't know. But, you know, I think it's going to continue to be more and more connected. But also in 10 years, that will be the end of the decade of the International Decade of Sciences for Sustainable Development. So will we have achieved much progress in those sustainable development goals? I hope. But you know, they are a big challenge, and if, you know, we have to work together and hopefully overcome all these disparate, fragmented approaches to things if we're ever going to achieve that. And data, of course, is a big part of that, and maybe AI. But also in 2032 is the next International Polar Year. So will we have much ice there? What's the data collection going to be like? How, you know, what will that all, you know, that's quite far away to think about, but we're already planning for it. So, but that will be in the past in 10 years. So I know it's a lot to think about in 10 years. I really think by that point, we will have had a shift in some of the things I've been talking about in terms of the research assessment. I think data and software and these tools are going to be a much more emphasized aspect of what is expected of the whole community of researchers, you know, rather than just the publications. So I expect to see some of these shifts that we've been working towards, you know, but I do fear some of what Aimee was saying about maybe differences in different regions and countries in terms of the approaches and sharing between them. But I think with the conversations like we're having today is the only way we can try to avoid that reality.
Sil, do you want to add something?
No, just that I was thinking like probably I was too pessimistic, and Reyna is right. I mean, like in many cases we see a lot of things happening in the past 10 years, and we have to recognize that as well. So I was just like going back with my pessimistic approach, and I think there are many things that are positive and that we've achieved together in the past decade or so, and I think many things could be achieved in the future. I still think that there are many things to look out for, but and I mean, we need to be mindful of the risks, but there are also many things that we did right. So probably there's going to be many things that are coming our way in the next 10 years that are going to be okay as well.
That's great. I love that you changed your idea of like very, very negative, and then no, maybe it's not going to be that bad, but no, but I think, and that's kind of the perks and the good things of like having these conversations collectively. And I think that's also part of the magic of thinking that, of course, there is a long way to go, but at the same time, I think it's going to sound a little bit cheesy and cliche, but I think we are becoming wiser as a community. not as persons, not as sectors, but as communities, I think we are wiser than 10 years before. And for sure, it's going to be a very interesting decade for what's coming for AI, data, science, and all the future conversations. Aimee, please.
Thank you. I just wanted to jump in quickly. Thank you so much. I get very excited and then I accidentally talk over people. I'm sorry. It's terribly rude of me. But I'm reminded of a very famous line by William Gibson, the science fiction writer, because sci-fi is my jam. But you know, the future is here. It's just unevenly distributed. So in the foresight and futurism community, and for those of y'all who don't sort of engage in that community, I think that's another community that would be great to be involved in these kinds of thinkings. And one of the things that futurists and foresight people do, you don't predict the future, right? It's all about scenarios, but 10 years is about the time frame that people tend to look at. And it's looking at what's already happening around you. They call them signals, like just small random things. They're not big trends yet. They're not big movements yet, but something that's happening that you start to pay attention, because that might well be the big thing in 10 years. It's that idea of, you know, we overestimate the impact of a technology right now and underestimate its impact in the future. So when people started making meat in vats, or, you know, all of that kind of stuff, it's first they laugh at you and then they listen to you and then they buy you or something. But it's look out for the things that right now feel a bit strange. I'm not saying creepy and surveillance-y, but something that just feels like, well, that's a little bit wild. I mean, come on, that's probably going to be the thing that people are up to in 10 years. So I just wanted to add that.
That's amazing. Thanks, Aimee. And really, really thank you, because I really enjoyed this conversation. I hope you too. And also something that I take also to think about in the future and to start thinking about creating new spaces, dialogues, and our work at ILDA. It's like also expanding, this idea of data readiness, not just as a technical issue, but also as a process, as the connection with the communities, and a very also connected thing to human processes in terms of developing trust, in terms of creating communities of practice, of sharing knowledge, of complementing. Maybe you have the legal framework, but also you think about implementation. And also there are super great examples in some areas like science and all the things that you brought to the table. And I think for like kind of, if I put everything on one sentence to conclude this space, will be that, like it's not just having the right infrastructure, it's also to have the right people behind those infrastructures. So thanks a lot. It was a really, really enjoyable afternoon for us, and a great way to reflect and to think about this big issue, and a great way to also having you three in this space and in this table. It was a privilege, and thanks everyone also for joining us, and let's continue our work and thinking together about what do we want to construct in the next 10 years. So thanks everyone. Muchas gracias.
Thank you all. Have a great one.
You too.